so welcome to the second talk of the day. And so we're going to have Viviana Monsalve here for presenting the onboarding process at Google Fonts. So I know there are a lot of people that are interested in like how he operates to submit fonts to Google. And then if you read the description of the talk, you can see that it's exactly about that, how it is. Sometimes people think that it's just straightforward and then just send the font and then that's it. But there's so much thing involved in this that, of course, it's like you need to know the process to be actually accepted or even to be successful on your with submitting your font to them. So yeah, Viviana is going to be bringing that. It's going to be a video that, but I'll first of all, I'll just present her. I'll just like do a slight introduction to it. Then you're going to have the video. And then also we'll see at the end, then we have the time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please, I'll just remind you to do instead of on the chat, there is like an icon on the chat that is like a question mark. That's for Q&A. So it's better if you put the questions in there, otherwise it might be lost in the middle of the text in the chat. So please use that column with the question mark. At the end, when I start doing the questions, I will repeat the question. Some people prefer to be mentioned or not. So since I don't know what is going to be the case, I'm not going to mention who is doing the question. But I'll repeat the question because when we submit the video later on to YouTube, people don't see the chat. So that's why so forgive me if I do repeat myself or repeating the question out loud, but I think that's important for this process. So yeah, I'd just like to thank you, just invite Viviana for her time here to show like this process of onboarding fonts for Google Fonts. So yeah, please, Viviana, welcome to this live session. You're talking from Colombia, right?
Yeah, I'm here in Bogota, Colombia.
Yes, and the other side of the world in Australia. But originally from Brazil. So yeah, two Latin Americans. It's good to have this session as well. So I see already in the chat, like a lot of people saying hi to you. Yeah, so Viviana, tell a little bit about yourself before we start with the video. So yeah, so just a little bit of maybe especially how do you end up doing this work for Google?
Well, I have contributed in the past with 2 fonts in Google, and despite that, I think many, like in many other cases for any other designers, we did that not being too conscious about we were participating in an open source project. Like you have this idea that is only about releasing something to be freely available. But then I was, when I did an upgrade for one of my fonts and the process to get it published was really slow, I reached Dave Crossland and I asked him, and he actually told me, like, yes, it's a difficult process to update. You have a long list pending. You want to collaborate in the process? And I was like, for sure. It will be a really nice opportunity to learn many things that will be needed, like production, the production part of the font. Because at the same time, there is another, like, divisions in, like, as a type designer, you tend to finish your work, like drawing all the outlines and everything, leaving the typeface lovely. But then after that, it comes a huge, important job. It's about the font production and everything and getting it ready for it to be published. So yes, I joined into that process, and this is the result actually about after understanding a lot, you know, that this has helped me, and I wish it could help anybody to understand what to put the pieces in order, you know, because you have all this idea rounding around your head, but to give them like a map or some sort of stability. So yes, that's why I'm here.
All right, great. Yeah, so then we will start with the video, and then as I said before, at the end, we'll catch up with the Q&A.
Hello, I'm Viviana Monsalve. I'm a type designer currently working on font production as part of the font publishing process to Google Fonts. Today, I'm going to talk about the onboarding process, sharing some considerations on what it takes to contribute.
Google Fonts is a highly used platform of web fonts, so the demand or desire to include fonts in it has grown over the time and includes now a wide range of motivations to participate in the project. Either from hobbyists with a particular interest, whether technical, stylistic, or linguistic, who just want to share their work, young professionals that want to gain more visibility by getting their new fonts published, or a family developed for a brand or a project that will need to serve the fonts on different platforms, so it could be benefit from publishing it into the API as the simplest way to do it. And of course, there are also commission projects, whether by Google or not, to be Libre, among many other possible reasons. Regardless of the origin of the project, since Google Fonts serves free open source fonts, this might give the impression that making contributions could be immediate or direct, akin to contributing to a wiki or other similar model, or that a project that is considered done under the more standard private way of doing things will be ready or enough for it to get published. However, after working with designers while onboarding their fonts, it has become apparent that it's not as straightforward as it might be thought. The project needs to meet very particular specifications first, which differs both from the private way of producing fonts and from the way to contribute to other public platforms or libraries. There have been increasing efforts on establishing the spec as the entire process evolves. The complexity of the goals has also increased, particularly now with the inclusion of support for variable fonts, which requires the tools to constantly evolve, and this implies also the permanent revision of the process and specifications to go along with the changes. Now, beyond the purely operative matters, it has to come to my attention that there are some prior concepts or principles that operate behind the requirements, which understanding will give them context, but they could be and have been often overlooked. The aim of this talk is to offer an overall context of the onboarding process to Google Fonts that could help designers to gain a greater understanding of the big picture of what and why is required, and hopefully to make sense of the challenge and opportunities of contributing. Two main principles operate as the underlying frame of reference for many of the requirements for publishing fonts in Google Fonts: the open source model and Libre fonts movement, and to serve massively available web fonts. Although the term open is commonly taken either just as releasing something for free, which often leads to the bias of lack of value, or simply as making something publicly available, it was chosen by the movement to make a thoughtful differentiation from the term free, thereby giving it a deeper sense. Open source is a decentralized software development model that encourages open collaboration, as defined in Wikipedia. 4 key concepts to take into account for the onboarding process emerge from this same definition: decentralized, development, open, and collaboration. I'm not going to go into the history of this, as fascinating as it might be, as there are multiple sources of information on the backgrounds of the selection of the term. And also, Dave Crossland have been talking about it in many conferences. But the first consideration to really take into account is that the open source is an actual way of thinking and doing things that have defined a culture and help to define the Libre Fonts movement. The Libre Fonts movement has its roots in the 4 freedoms of free software. They were established to preserve the purpose of giving users power over the tools like software, or in this case, fonts. This sense of freedom that goes beyond open availability and monetary cost is the core of the movement and is the reason for the change to the term Libre. This is my Libre interpretation of them to give context to some requirements on the onboarding process. Freedom to use and run. First, the freedom to use and run. Assuming fonts are software in some way, this preserves the freedom to use and run them for any purpose, in private or public, by any party, in any field or endeavor. So it implies the following conditions for the onboarding process. It is necessary to have a basic understanding of how OpenTypeForm works, and ideally managing Python packages or tools using pip. Using Builder or FontMake to build the fonts, which are open source tools, so not dependent on proprietary editors. The fonts can be built on any platform since the use of open source tools. And of course, the building instructions shall be included so that other users can recreate the process. To put this into practice, Google Fonts has continued the efforts of having its own freely available tools, which will help contributors to finalize their families. These requirements attempt to ensure the font generation is possible under the same quality conditions for anyone. Thus, this freedom marks the first of the main differences with the private way of doing things. It's decentralized. You will no longer working only on your terms or those of your team. You will have to take others, whether users, developers, or editors, into consideration, so that the project has to work well beyond yourself and the usual private or closed practices. The second freedom is the freedom to study and edit. Users should be able to study the projects unhindered, so the fonts should be available to users in a complete source code form. This freedom is a crucial component of this open source model, so it incorporates some important requirements. All the source files should be included and available to everyone. There should be only one set of sources. The project must be developed on GitHub with the complete sources, open to public participation, and actively maintained. Complete sources include all the build instructions or scripts needed to reproduce the creation of the fonts. Having the possibility of privately modifying the fonts in any way also gives the possibility for them to be studied and improved, which, at the same time, opens one of the most meaningful opportunities under the Libre Fonts movement: learning. Although this freedom imposes the fewest conditions to the process, sometimes can cause some conflicts to designers who are more used to have their own recipes under control. Yet, it is one of the more powerful freedoms. Making the source files available for others to study or modify or edit them is also possible to receive feedback, whether as fixers or New York added to it. And this opens a space for mutual learning. The goal of sharing and learning among peers is at the root of the movement. The possibility of learning empowers contributors to further develop their own products along with their own reasoning and knowledge in the practices of the field. The third freedom granted in the Libre Font movement is the freedom to contribute. This freedom allows and encourages users to contribute either with new jobs or with modifications made to a project. The changes performed on the fund, whether privately or publicly, could be included as a contribution. But to ensure the clean process, the contributions have to be registered and organized, making them easy to track and manage. Therefore, for new projects, the font design should be original and of high quality. The projects need to keep in GitHub version control system, where every family needs to have its own upstream repository. Embracing the GitHub culture is necessary. Incorporating the workflow and learning some concepts related to administration of the projects, like registering every part of the process to permit more control on the development. The projects are developed publicly so that anyone can raise issues to make comments, suggestions, or requests, among others. The copyright uses the scheme the authors of the typographic project, and the authors and collaborators are detailed in the corresponding files in the repository. This permits including more credits as more people get involved. The use of a version control system like GitHub is the method to take this freedom into practice. On the one hand, it eases the contribution process, making it possible to register and track all the changes made in a project in an organized way. On the other hand, it enables an open communication among peers and users from early stages. As the development happens publicly, ideally from day one, this enables to see the work in progress and file issues during the development, or sometimes very briefly after the launching. Working in the open also requires to be more open to receiving comments from others, which is significantly different from the traditional ways of working, particularly for us designers. Nonetheless, the feedback and early contributions are one of the most valuable assets of this culture. Having multiple eyes on the development leads to more tested and therefore more robust projects. Or, as David Lemon said when talking about Adobe's adoption of open source methods, by giving fonts away, you get far more users, and broader exposure means more user feedback. We are learning about what features matter to various sets of people. When there are several 100,000 users, they'll find things we have missed. The fourth freedom is the one more related to the common understanding with open, as is the freedom to share, redistribute, and redistribute modifications. This means that any party is able to swap, give the fonts away at no charge, or redistributes the fonts and its modifications. The fonts should not place restriction on other work that are distributed in combination with the font, and the derived fonts must be distributed under the same terms as the license of the original. Consequently, this leads to the font embedding must be allowed. Reserved font names are not allowed, as they will make forking and modifying the fonts an infringement which will contradict the freedom. An OFL license is required for the project. The main general conception around open source projects is that they are freely shared, so these freedoms correspond to the most widespread idea around Google Fonts. However, these requirements are specified to ensure the freedom is actually observed. The use of OFL has become the standard, among other reasons, as it will require fonts and derivatives to be released under the same license to prevent people from making money by simply redistributing the font sources. Again, the open character of the Libre fonts movement goes way beyond the mere rights to distribution, encouraging openness as liberty. The four fundamental freedoms actually operate as an active principles that frames a good part of the requisites of onboarding process. Now, in addition to the demands originated by the four freedoms of Libre fonts, the second principle that exerts an important influence on the requirements for the onboarding process is to serve massively available web fonts. Google Fonts is also an API that serves web fonts to all sorts of users, and this imposes multiple conditions. Some numbers could be handy to bring some perspective. According to Web Almanac, Google Fonts is still the most used platform to serve fonts. The popularity rate of Google Fonts among font hosting services is 70%, and from those websites using the API, this is the sum of the total views for the fonts in the catalog. 49 trillion is a number even difficult to grasp. There are also detailed figures of views per font, plus a list of browsers and operating systems where they are used, sorted by the percentage of use. These scales are very likely to be very different from the font use rates in any other scenario, whether private or on other open source platforms. So getting a font family to be published on the website means it has to be included in the GF API, and this implies it should have passed all the checks to ensure it will work under a wide range of different environments. The QA process and checks impose some requirements that could be perceived as restrictions, but actually focus on ensuring the best possible performance of the fonts in such diverse conditions. Hence, to ensure the best performance of the fonts under such a wide range of conditions of usage, the requirements that this principle imposes could be compiled under these four main standards: scalable font production, meeting overall specs, careful updates, and ensure the QA process. Scalable font production. Serving almost 3/4 of the fonts in web pages, the fonts must be treated with the same level of care as done with software. The following requirements were set to ensure a scalable production. Font builds must be repeatable and typically should be done in one step. All the font production tools can be run from the command line. Recently, many of them have been wrapped up under GF Tools Builder, one powerful single tool that will perform for you the required steps for production and for post-production, covering the most common fixes needed. All the tools are written in Python, and they are distributed using pip. This allows users to use specific versions of each package and ensures we are able to get the same result for each build. The tools improves constantly following the pace or pushing the new developments while considering the necessities of end users, applications, browsers, and platforms. To ensure a collaborative process among peers, it is necessary to set up a workflow that works well independently of the author and particular tools originally used. This has brought some challenges, as the one project could be considered done or finished given the fonts were produced okay using the proprietary tools. But often the editors are taking care of many production stuff for the designers, that working on the open schema will be different. Additionally, font production increasingly follows the software development logic of launch, test, and iterate. So accordingly, it demands ensuring rapidly repeatable production process under the same conditions. Meeting overall specs. Working for a broad group of users requires thinking globally, anticipating multiple further cases, and considering the others and their necessities. Setting the fonts to work widely on the web implies meeting the advances and limitations of the major platforms, applications, browsers, and this requires: we follow the Microsoft OpenType specification as a common ground of reference and understanding. To verify multiple browser support, including some of older versions, often marks more restrictions than desired. Fonts and features must be set according to the most widest standards. Meet and deal with applications requirements and issues demands to include different formats of information for one same issue, like the coverage of different name ID in the name table. Settings and decisions must anticipate or include reusable and intuitive concepts. For example, the inclusion of a new custom axis must take into account many additional cases. Font must support at least the minimal set of characters defined in the Google Fonts Latin Core Glyphset. Vertical metrics should comply with our guide, which was set to balance the platform conditions and ease the updates. Working in the open and massive reinforces the need to take into account others, making both the process and the products as global as possible, usable for a wide range of users and uses. Sometimes personal desires around small or simple things like custom names for certain features have to give way to the common or general good. So meeting the general specifications and arriving at standardizable concepts becomes necessary to secure the process and performance in multiple scenarios. Strong considerations and debates, as well as tons of empathy, are needed. Careful updates. Updating fonts can be a tricky process, so it needs to be done carefully. The Google Fonts font API is non-version, which means that all users will receive the same fonts. Thus, when updating fonts, there must be ensured that it does not break existing documents or websites. To meet this standard, it is necessary. Fixing issues before upgrading a new QA round must be done so that the update also follows the new specification and checks. The use of typometrics must be enabled to avoid regression issues. The modification must be made to existing sources and merged into the upstream project GitHub repository. No glyphs or styles previously served should be missing. Vertical metrics and overall proportion of the font must have the same visual appearance as the published fonts to end users. Visual regressions must be avoided as much as possible. Versioning within the font is based on SEMVer, semantic versioning going from patch to major significant version. And a font log file should be created or updated, detailing what changed on the project. Akin to software development, one fundamental criterion around updates is to keep them as positive or easygoing experience for users as they might be. As the font API is non-version, sometimes compromises need to be made. Despite how desired they might be, some new adjustments performed on the project could lead to major regressions. And when talking about trillions or billions of users per font, breaking content for them wouldn't be a minor issue. The fourth standard needed to serve massively available web fonts is to ensure the QA process. The quality assurance process is fairly strict in comparison with standard requirements. The tools have been developed to standardize the QA process and are frequently updated to meet the new specifications. Treating fonts as software means they should be tested. FontBakery is the quality assurance tool that checks the font's files conform with the open type specification and universal accepted good practices in the industry. It aims to be a source of truth to reduce the dogmas of the field. The check results are categorized according to levels of relevance, ranging from skip to error. The reported fails have a must-fix status. Font Definitor is the tool used to compare the family against the same families served in Google Fonts to spot regressions between font releases. Things like glyphs, kerning, marks, mark-to-marks, name, and attributes are inspected. GFTools Gen HTML allows us to test how font families render on different platforms and browsers. Local tests must be done on the broadly main applications used: Microsoft Word, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, among others.
Following the quality assurance process from the first release of the font will secure the overall quality for projects. You will be sure of its performance under the main standards of the industry, and it will allow an easier updating process. Including font bakery checks in the early stages of the design is strongly suggested, as it will help spotting issues since the beginning of the project and will lead to a cleaner development. Also, the inclusion of GitHub actions for continuous integration will be ideal. It's worth saying that the onboarding process is a peer-to-peer collaborative process itself. The tools used are constantly updated, and this involves a lot of work and efforts. They were created and have been actively maintained over time primarily by Felipe Sanchez, Lasse Pfister, and Mark Foley, among a list of contributors that continues to grow. In summary, the process of publishing a font to Google Fonts is a demanding one that requires attention to many aspects and is ideally done collaboratively with each designer. Designers' understanding of this onboarding process, the underlying principles, and the requirements derived from it will hopefully make it smooth. Contributing to the open source is a challenging and enriching experience. The Libre culture mentality also requires an open mind that allows people to take more action over their font production process and the resulting products. It is an opportunity to strengthen their own knowledge, the community knowledge, and in this way, the entire typographic field. Libre fonts is not a matter of price, but of liberty.
All right. Yeah, that was the presentation from Viviana. Thanks, Viviana, for that. I think, yeah, it's good that you started bringing up a little bit of context before just diving into what it is to submit fonts for Google, because especially when it comes to, as you said, about the mindset, what is behind submitting fonts to Google. So I think that's really important that you bring it up. We'll go. Yeah, I have a few remarks and questions in here. I'll try to. We do have like roughly 50 minutes or so to talk. Just like to before we start with the questions, and there's even one from Dave Crossland. The question if the open source is a cult. So I think I'd just like to say that Dave. I studied with him in Reading in 2008. He was in my class, and it was interesting to see that even back then he already had his ideas, and also it was really good to talk to him and then see a guy that was thinking way differently from all the other commercial outputs that we did have the point, and also that even at present how different is the mindset. And I think that's why what you brought it up is important for us to understand why is behind the mentality of doing fonts that if you want to submit your fonts and publish your fonts at Google, what does it mean? So what it represents, and especially this thing about that the project being in a GitHub repository, and especially being like open in kind of I would say even like an honest process in a sense as well, that you show all the steps and you're open to modifications and so before I have I would say either a question or a remark about the first of all is like the process of pitching fonts, that let's say how, because you see there is as you said, there's a lot of things that people have to worry about, even like which kind of testing they want to do. So I would just wonder how far they should be by the time that you want to pitch to submit a font to Google. So let's say people, they should have embraced all those concepts so far, or even let's say using font bakery or so, or is something that is to start if you just look at the letter forms and later on you ask those questions. So how far are you willing to go with these procedures? How does it work then?
Yeah, that's why I give this context, because I think if you just want to release something for free, you have many other platforms. Like you have, I don't know, Square fonts, Square fonts, or any other platform. And it's not about that. The opportunity here is like to embrace the open source culture. So in that way, you could learn a lot. You could just give your source files and let the others do the job, but that's not the point. The point actually is to know what is needed, why is needed, and the usual process is that somebody submits a font, and as I said, it's very regular. Many of the things that are covered here could be like obvious, like they sound really obvious like that, but it's not, because we have had a lot of questions. And the first one will be that, like, my project is ready, why are you asking me this type of things? Why should the project work with FontMake? I am already producing it with Eclipse or FontLab or whatever. And you have to start to explain to the designer, like, yes, but this is an open source culture, so the idea is anyone that will want to contribute in the future to the project should be able to reproduce the production process. So in that sense, you have to have built-in scripts. And sometimes designers or the author, because the authors could be not only type designers, sometimes there are actually developers, and for them it's really easy, the process, because they are more used to this culture about the development process in software. So they are used to the quality assurance and testing the projects and everything. So when they use it to them, like, you have to create a building script for the process to work for everybody. Even if they don't know how to do that, they are really comfortable going to the sources, inspecting the tools, checking other projects, and reproducing the process. But for us, and commonly for type designers, it's a different process, because we are not comfortable with that. We are not comfortable even with using terminal. We are really used to have graphic user interfaces, like programs with graphic user interfaces. So when we are told to, like, go to terminal and create a virtual environment, we are like, I don't want to break my computer. I don't want to break anything. And if you embrace the challenge, and that's the different mentality. If you are just releasing for free, it's like putting something in some place. Like, you could be at Dropbox and you could release a link in Dropbox and you will be done. But in this case, it's very different. And also this about the massive numbers with the massive production, we have to ensure the project will work well in a different and wide range of environments. So that also imposes a lot of conditions that you would not have if you just release something in some web page or something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. No. So since you mentioned about also the technical issues, I wonder about the modifications that you mentioned, that you have to be really, really careful about what you're going to change, because it then affects millions of users depending on the font. So I'm wondering if those modifications are usually proposed by the author, or is more like the Google itself, or users. So let's say sometimes how is it usually you get to do a modification, where it comes from?
I couldn't say there is a usually like you have all of those cases that you just mentioned. Like sometimes it's the author that was working in the project and now he wants to get the improvements released in Google also. So sometimes it's the designer who just improved the project. Sometimes it's some user that is asking for something to be done in the project. Sometimes they just ask and the author have the opportunity to improve the font with those submit requests. But sometimes one contributor just the project made the improvement, like if particularly if they are like the Vietnamese diacritics or something, and they made the change because this is one of the opportunities, like contribute and edit the fonts. And if they think that work is worth to be shared, it could be submitted as a contribution to the process, to the project. Sometimes the authors are really taking care of the repository and they care a lot about the project, so they have this conversation with the person that is making the contribution. But sometimes the authors have forgotten about the project. They are not interested in maintaining it. But there are some other contributors that are interested in having the font working. So that's why they are allowed to, to improve the font and get it in working better for your necessities. And yes, there is all sorts of possibilities on why a project could be updated. Yes.
And I wonder also that, as you said, the improvements. So when you think about improvements, they might be technical, in a sense of, like I say, a glyph that is missing. That could be one. There is a glyph that is not in a proper way for a specific language, and then you have to change it. But I wonder if it's also when, let's say, if you talk about the spacing, let's say if the tracking is too tight and you want to make it wider, for instance. So that it is based on a technical decision, but it's not necessarily technical. It's like more like a visual preference or something. So I wonder how it goes for that to assess if is that somebody that, because as you mentioned at the end, like Felipe and the other two guys that are working on the checking the technical aspects of the font. But I wonder when it comes to things like this, that is more like about the visuals, about the design decisions. So if it is that, how do it go for, let's say, to say that this is an improvement or not? So if it has to be approved or not?
Yeah, there will be always a thin line, like even for you as a designer, like this is an improvement, this is really needed, or this is something like I just want to see differently. But it has to go at the end. It's just a human, something like that. And our engineers are very careful about that, particularly Mark Foley, who has had to suffer the previous cases that in the chat it was mentioned that we have these hard cases in the past when we just, as far some they made the update because it was an improvement, but at the same time a lot of complaints came up after the update. So it's particularly with spacing is a really good question, because sometimes you have this vertical regression because you have changed the vertical metrics, but also you could have horizontal regressions. And if it's actually a really good improvement and the previously spacing or kerning was kind of really bad, we go with it and we take the chance to change it because it's going to be a really good improvement. We care about having better fonts, and day by day we care more and more about that. But if it's just something like it was okay, but the improvement is going to cause a lot of changes for the designers because you will have this proof flow over text, and we will ask the designer, like, please make it a little bit less drastic to change, so we don't have this horrible situation for the users.
Yeah, nice. And also another question, it's about when the testing that you have to do for let's say the production part of the font. So let's say either for do hinting or if you're testing different browsers, as you mentioned, that you have to test across different browsers. How much do they usually expect from users, from authors, to know this and to be involved at this stage, because I know some people even use just automatic features for kerning, apart from others that I think you break it up. No, you're back.
No.
So
Okay.
so also some people just prefer to do auto hinting, auto kerning, or using just a software to do that for them, as others prefer to do it manually, checking all the things. So how much do you usually expect from authors, from type designers, to be engaged in this kind of technical productions, or is it not at all?
Yeah, we currently, in most of the cases, we are doing auto hint, TTF auto hint, actually, using the tool. And in some cases, it's better even to release them without hinting, because it will be rendered even better without that. It depends a lot on the project and the characteristic of the project, because if it's a script or display font, sometimes it's really better to do it without hinting. But we care about that. There is also receiving a check to have at least a TTF auto hint. And when the designers are doing the production part, we ask them to include it. Actually, as it is a fail in Font Bakery, the Font Bakery result is going to ask that immediately. And if we are the ones that are taking care of the production stuff for the designer, we include that part, at least that level. It is not so common lately to see a project. I haven't had my first project with auto hinting, to be honest, because like the screens have now had this amazing resolution and everything. So we do it good with auto hinting. But yes, the process is more and more taking in hand-to-hand work with the designers. So we try to report them in if they can make the improvement or the fixing to the font, they will do that. If they don't have the knowledge, we say how to, or even we can explain them how to do that, or we do the job for them. But yes, that is an important part. This is one of the main, a lot of requisites that are included in the Google Fonts profile from Bakery. Yeah, and once one designer asked me, like, I'm about to run my foundry by myself with a partner. How much should I care about Font Bakery checks? I mean, I know that this specific profile that is called Google Fonts, actually. And there are also other profiles in Font Bakery, the universal profile, the custom for some vendor. But my recommendation was you could run the Google Fonts profile, because it's going to be the more demanding scenario, like fixes if you want your font to run well in multiple browsers and multiple applications and platforms. What do you choose, like, to sacrifice in a way? Like, okay, this is not going to work really well in this browser, but being a private project, I could decide over that. But you will at least have the knowledge that is going to happen if the font is going to be rendered in some older browser or something like that.
All right, great. We have a question here in the chat that I'm not sure if you are willing to answer that or not, or if it's more to Dave or anybody else. It's about how to, if you get paid about by getting fonts published at Google, and how does it work, the royalty model? So would you like to take on that?
I could give a brief introduction for Dave to answer that. From my experience, as I said in the beginning of the presentation, like, the reasons for wanting to have a font publishing in Google Fonts are really many many of them. They're like a wide range of possibilities. So sometimes the contributors don't want to have to be paid. They are not asking for money. They just want to release the fund in Google, because the reasons I said, because they need to have a fund that includes, I don't know, support for the Vanagari or something, and they have done that job and they need it to be published in Google to have it available in the API. So that could be one reason, and they are not asking for money. There are, from that scenario to the scenario where there are some projects, whether by Google or not, commissioned to be Libre. And in the middle, you have all range also of possibility about that, about being paid. But always Dave is going to be the last person to talk about money.
Right. Yeah, probably if you get lucky later on, you can find Dave on the Hangout space as well. So maybe if he's in there, you can ask those questions to him or have like a further discussion. So yeah, to finalize, because we are short on time. There's a final question about if the Google fonts they check the support of languages. Let's say the Latin fonts that don't handle Yoruba combinations of the M with acute, with dot below, and etc. So if it is checked by default, or how does it work that for?
No, the default actually is the Google Fonts Latin core encoding. That's our default, which is basic Latin default for it to get published. Dave has this strange consideration and worry. One of his goals has been to include more and more support for languages and scripts. But that is going to be related to particular projects. And if the project says we cover Latin and Vietnamese and Latin, all the Latin, Central European, and so on, it's going to be related on the project. And that's part of the information that we tend to introduce in the description of the file. But if you want to have fun with that support, that could be raised as an issue in Google Fonts. I'm going to place the link for that. There you can ask for that on a particular project, or as a general requisition, like please include fonts that covers this or that. Yes, that in the issues in GitHub, as I said, is a very important culture also, GitHub, to learn the way about changing comments and asking for something and receiving feedback. You could do that there.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I think with that we'll finish the session. Yeah, we are 5 minutes left for the next one. So yeah, I invite you all also to go to the Hangout space if in between talks, and if you want to stay there for longer and have a chat with Viviana, if you're willing to go in there as well, so you can even continue the discussion. And also if Dave is around, he can also be in there. And also I think encourage everybody there, even people that have submitted fonts to Google, so they can also bring their own perspective. So yeah, I think it's really enlightening. It's good to see. It's also because usually we go sometimes only for the technical issues related to submitting fonts. So it's good to see also what else is involved, what is in the stake, if you are really willing to be part of the family, right?
Yeah, and I would like to say that this is good as an experience in life, like it would be another experience. You don't have to become, like, referring to the first question of Dave, this is not a cult where you belong or not. You can participate once and have the experience and learn from that and continue with your private way of doing things. There is no problem with that. But I strongly suggest to do it, but having it like a full experience, like contributing to open source.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, thank you very much, Viviana, for your presentation, and for everybody that joined the session, we especially doing questions or so. So yeah, I hope to see you guys in the Hangout space in a while, and then check out the agenda as well for the following presentations. So yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.